Hello, this is my virtual presentation for TLAB 2014. My name's Sarah Findlater, I'm an assistant principal from London. My presentation is on engaging English lessons and digital tools, and this section of the presentation is creative writing. I'll be sharing with you some techniques that I use in my own classroom that I feel bring out the best in my students in terms of their creative writing, generates lots of brilliant ideas and gets them really thinking outside the box on some occasions. So firstly, using drama with creative writing can be a really useful tool, similar to if you were having a look at an unfamiliar novel or a poem which is in a situation they've not come across before. If you're asking them to do some creative writing, perhaps involving a situation or a character that they may not have come across in their own life, then using drama can be a really great way of pushing them into thinking and feeling like that character. So something like hot seating or role play or even freeze framing and talking about that can be a really useful tool to get their ideas flowing and to get discussions going around the topic that you'd like them to do creative writing on. Second one is drawing. There's many different ways that I use this in class when we're doing creative writing. For instance, we may just have a number of prompts on the board that I will shout out or put on the board to them, and they'll have to draw images on a piece of paper and form a visual plan. And it just generates different ideas than if they were just writing a plan. There's reluctant writers as well. That's often a way to get them into thinking in a more visual way. It can also help with their description. If they've drawn it first, they're going to think about the detail a little bit more when they're writing it. So you have to talk through their drawings and talk about how you can get someone to imagine that without it being there visually in front of them when they're reading. And third one, we have a couple that are linked, but they're not exactly the same, so I'll explain both of them. Story dice and story wheel, they're basic story prompts, really. And the first one, I'll show you an example. It is just an example, it's not the one I'm recommending. But this particular one is Rory's Story Cube, so this is an example of one. These cost around £10 for a pack, and they're to be used with a class. And the idea would be that you shake them, you roll them on the table, and whatever comes up on the top, on the surface of those dice, you use with your creative writing story. So it might ask them to include a sunny day, or a tent, or a particular animal, or a particular location, and it will just get there. It will take away the I'm not really sure what to write situation that can happen in classrooms when you're doing creative writing sometimes. So this particular one, you've got one that's just generic, you've got voyages here, you've also got different actions that can take place and various other kind of mixed sets that you can purchase. So that's the story cube. You can obviously also create your own. You don't have to purchase a story dice. You could just have a basic cube cut out with tabs that you could glue together and form your own dice. And do it that way, so you could have your own prompts that you give the class. Another similar technique is the story wheel. Now this is taken from, if you haven't come across it before, the HDFL website. They've got some great resources they've formed over the years. I don't know if it's been updated as much recently, but in the past I've used it quite a lot, and there's a lot of really brilliant resources that teachers have created and put up there, so have a little look around. But for the story dice, there are 4 examples here. These are seaside ones with different scenarios included, and this is a more generic one. I'll just pull up the generic one so you can see what it looks like. So this is one of the story wheels. So you could print it off and have it on their tables and give them some actual dice and get them to roll the dice. And the first round, for instance, if they get a 1 on their dice, they would have to include an adventurous child. In the second round, for instance, if they got a 5 on their dice, it would be a hot, red, barren desert would be their location. And if they got a 6 on their third round, they'd include a time capsule. So it just builds up quite unusual scenarios for them. So you could give them each dice and have them roll and have different storylines. You could also roll as a class and have a group plan that you're forming where you have the same location, same character and so on. So there's many different ways you could use that. It's quite visual, it's quite fun, it's kind of an element of surprise as well. Get some thinking outside the box. So 2 useful tools. For our fourth one, Book Flick is one that I like to use when I'm creative writing as well. And it's just getting out, so we'll get out a selection of fictional novels, put them in the centre of the tables where the students are working, and I will say that we're going to creative write. We will do some activities, having a look at grammar things such as sentence structure or vocabulary or punctuation. So they have a focus for the creative writing. Then we'll have the books in front of us and we will flick just and stop on a random page. So they'll all have different books. They'll all have a random page, and the first sentence that their eyes settle on, they have to take that full sentence and use that as the start of their very first paragraph. And then I'll give them a time limit to complete that paragraph with that particular sentence as their starter, and perhaps with if we were doing punctuation as the focus for that lesson, a focus on punctuation. Then I'll ring the bell and we'll pause. They'll flick the book again, and then whatever page they're on, they'll let their eyes focus, and the first sentence that they come across is the sentence starter for their next paragraph. Again, this can bring out, if there's names there, you may have to say take the name out and say she or he, just so that it flows properly and it doesn't not make sense. But this brings out some really interesting and unusual scenarios, and it makes them think about how they're structuring their stories, because normally, obviously, they wouldn't be dictated what the next kind of paragraph would be. So it makes them sometimes go outside of what they're comfortable with and find a different way of writing. Free writing as well. A lot of students will agonise for hours over, well, I'm not quite sure what word to use here, and I don't know quite what to do next, and it will stop them from being able to write enough in the timed conditions that we know they need to be able to when they're older, when they go towards GCSE and A-levels. So occasionally I will just say we'll do free writing, and I will do it with them on the board. So it's just thoughts on the page without stopping, not worrying about spelling, not worrying about punctuation, just writing. No pauses, even if the sentence in their head that they're putting down is, I'm not sure what I'm going to write at the moment. It's just getting them writing. So having more of a focus on that. Perspectives as well. We may actually have a look at some extracts from a novel, either that they're studying together, or we're studying together, or that they're studying alone, and we will change the perspective. So if it's first person, we'll take that extract and we will rewrite it in third person. So it's just getting them thinking about their writing style. Consequences is another one. So the classic sort of children's game of consequences, where I will be at the front of the class and I will give them a situation they have to write down. For instance, a boy meets a girl in a location. They will write that particular scenario, and then they will fold the paper over, pass it to their partner, and I'll give them another scenario that they need to write down and they need to share. And they will fold that over again. They need to write it down and then fold the paper over, and then they'll share their paper with the next person. I'll give them another scenario, and so on, so that I have a kind of basic outline of the plot. I dictate to them what happens in each section of the story, but they don't see what's happened before. So we take any names out. It's he or she, and we keep the gender the same. So I guide it so that it makes sense, and then we read we have a group reading session at the end. So in their tables of 4 or 6, they will read the consequences stories at the end. Really good fun, gets them writing without fear, and it gets them thinking about sharing their ideas without any kind of worry, because they've all sort of co-written that story. Using audios and visual, obviously. So when we're writing a scary story, I would put some kind of howling storm music in the background. If we are using visuals, I will try to have bright, vibrant, colourful images, if it's appropriate, and just really talk through those images and talk about how they can use those colours or that mood or anything else that we notice in that particular picture to feed into their writing. Poem crunches and word clouds. So using a famous poem or a famous novel and crunching those into the word clouds that I mentioned, or the word crunches that I've mentioned when we were looking at the class novel, and using that to form the basis for their own creative writing. You could even not tell them what the story was that you've crunched until they've finished their creative writing, and then see what they've come out with compared to what the real story actually is. Teacher thought talk writing. It's a bit of a mouthful there, but in the basic sense, it is just modelling really what you want them to write. So whatever the writing task, the creative writing task is, modelling for them, but not just writing it up, not just showing them what they should be doing, so having a pre-done slide, actually creating it while they're there and talking through the thought process, deleting things, talking about why you're deleting that particular sentence, moving words around and discussing why you're moving the words around. Sometimes I'll do that before they begin, sometimes I'll do it while they're writing, which can be distracting for some classes and it can work for others. But for some classes, it's really powerful. They'll see me altering and changing and moving things around, and you can see them kind of go, oh, right, okay, I can do that. And they'll go back in and alter things in their own writing. So just talking out loud your thought process when you're actually writing so that they can start thinking in that manner as well. And then the writing train association game. So the writing train that I mentioned when we were talking about essay writing in my previous presentation for Teach Meet Riddlesdown, it was for poetry essays. This is for creative writing. So it's basically, we will form a plan together as a class. They will do the first paragraph on the piece of paper alone for that creative writing. We'll all follow the same plan. Then it's not secret, they don't fold it over. They pass it on to the next person who reads their opening, then carries on to the next paragraph we've planned to do together. And then it will be timed again. They'll stop, they'll pass it on. It could just be between a pair or it could be round a table. They'll read the full story so far, and then they will carry it on. It gets them to see other people's writing styles. It gets them to spark ideas that perhaps they wouldn't have because they've been looking at other people's ideas. And it forms some really interesting stories. And again, they want to share at the end because it's co-created with other people in their class.